Most founders think they have time. Kyle Wells found out what happens when you don't. He'd agreed to help the owner of Champion Staffing modernize this 60-year-old plus firm as his COO. And days later, he was running the company after the founder unexpectedly passed away. No succession plan, no transition, just reality. This one's a wake-up call for every founder out there betting on someday. I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list.
Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applaud those models.
Undervalue.
Secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive. Let's get to the leaders list. Kyle Wells from Champion Personnel, thank you for joining us on the leaders list.
Thanks so much for having me this morning, Bryon.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So you've got a very interesting story. The company's been around for a very long time. You've done some great things. You're a new owner, or at least a transition owner from a company that's been around since, I think it was, 1964?
1964, that's correct. So we're celebrating our 62nd year in operation this year.
That's amazing. All right, so let's go ahead and back up a little bit. Why don't you just tell us what Champion Personnel does so that we can understand that, and then we'll move from there.
Certainly, Bryon. So Champion Personnel is a flexible talent organization focused in the Northeast Ohio territory. Our specific discipline of focus is the light industrial and manufacturing space. We consider ourselves a flexible talent acquisition organization because that's what the industry needs more than ever. When a company needs to hire, hiring patterns are less predictable than ever before, and especially in the small to medium-sized business space that we primarily serve, solutions need to be creative, they need to be cost-effective, and they need to deliver results. So coming from small to medium business-sized roots ourselves, we pride ourselves on being able to deploy quick talent solutions, custom billing solutions, as well as whatever sort of components of a search or hindrances a company may face, so we can help them, get immediate talent if they have shorter part-term needs, long-term talent, or if that's not clear, we can set up a transparent relationship with talent where they understand that there's an indefinite interim component to this work. And at a minimum, they're evolving their career skills, and our hiring client is getting the talent they need as well. We do this all under one of our branded slogans, a better job, a better life. So we feel that transparently, all three parties involved, meaning Champion, our hiring client, and the talent that we place, should accomplish and feel a better job and in turn experience a better life through the talent journey we're going on with. So, we find that sometimes staffing is unbalanced towards one side or the other, typically towards the hiring client because they're who signed the check that the staffing company gets a check.
Right.
So we pride ourselves on eliminating that kind of industry tendency and really creating bridges between the local communities and the hiring companies that we serve. So that's actually a part of our mission statement here, is that we build durable bridges for hiring companies in the area.
Man, Kyle, that's fantastic, because what I love about Champion, and since I've talked to you several times, what I think is most interesting is how you've really, in an age of AI and automation, you recognize that the manufacturing industry requires a different kind of solution, and you guys have flexed and changed to be able to work with that type of business. So riches are in the niches. You've identified and focused, and you've really invested in relationships. And so from staying a regional size, focusing on those kinds of companies has obviously served you guys really well, right?
It certainly has, Bryon. First and foremost, we're very passionate Northeast Ohioans, Clevelanders specifically. Cleveland has a long history of being an industrial powerhouse in this country. Like a lot of industrial areas, that's certainly evolved over the past 4 to 5 decades. But we want to preserve that industrial roots that this area was founded on. Many folks don't know that Ohio is the 3rd largest state for manufacturing related employment in the country. So it's a much bigger market than people realize. And at the end of the day, companies in this area deserve a lot of value from a staffing provider. So from our perspective, the only way to deliver that value is highly focused expertise, especially geographically. So we pride ourselves that all of our recruiters, effectively grew up in the Northeast Ohio area. They bleed brown and orange for our Cleveland Browns, or scarlet and gray for our Buckeyes down in Columbus. And we're passionate about that. We're passionate about the local players in industry. And we want to, help evolve the next future of manufacturing as we do get into AI, data centers, and some of the booming sectors that we're seeing.
Yeah. And so it's obvious, Kyle, when you talk from a position of vision and uh, really committing to the values that the organization cares about. But I think it's super interesting because that's not necessary. You didn't start that company. So talk to us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up in this situation where you can completely commit to the values and what you're building. But how'd you get to that point?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for addressing the prioritization of, core values and integrity in our mission statement, because it is near and dear to our heart. Again, we recognize some of the challenges or negative reputations around the industry at times as, being less than scrupulous in some of their practices or areas you have to avoid it. And we want to completely change that reputation, especially locally in our market. And the best way to do that is through transparency. I first
and
kind
follow
of
through
and follow
right?
through.
Do what you say you're going to do.
And results speak for themselves. And that's why we pride ourselves on less than 5% of our placements resulting in what we call a negative end, or a situation that's within our control that we could have avoided through better interview tactics or things like that. Not too many companies out there have a 95% retention rate.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredibly high.
Vision for this all started from the shop floor. I started at Champion 14 years ago, interestingly enough, as a temporary associate on a shop floor assignment. Like a lot of individuals in their early 20s, I was full of confidence, but not full of a plan at the time. I left a reputable organization, just like many talent representatives that come into our offices do, and I didn't know where to start. So I had an opportunity with a company locally, a rubber production plant and quality control, and it exposed me to how manufacturing companies really work. I learned the plant from its operations from the ground up. I learned the skills associated with quality control, and that transitioned over the course of the first year of my employment into production planning, inside sales, outside sales, material planning, procurement. And based on the size of the facility, I was able to get my hands on and get direct experience in all these areas. After about a couple years, Champion, being the organization that it is, recognized my potential and said, "You'd be a tremendous recruiter." So after a few years in the rubber industry, I made the leap and joined Champions Leagues as a recruiter. I then learned the recruiting practice and how to identify talent and develop them. But through that experience, it quickly became clear that I had something that other recruiters didn't have, which is a relatable experience to the, shop floor worker and the industrial mindset. And as I started to meet with, hiring clients, hiring managers in different organizations, I found that was the biggest piece they were missing. They went to HR conferences, they went to leadership development planning, they did all of those things, but none of them were from the perspective of what does an industrial worker want and need to be successful. And Bryon, you and I both know from a leadership perspective, if you don't know, it's easier to put it on the worker and say they're not motivated, they don't care, they don't want to do these things. But you and I both know that's not true. Only 1 in 3 people are actually engaged at work. So that's something that I quickly realized became that opportunity. How do we build that engagement and enlighten companies into what their what the industrial staff is thinking, wanting, and needing. What is their better job, better life?
So Kyle, I know we're talking about your story, but how do you do that today? How do you get that in? Because I'm thinking about the advertising industry, right? When I was first coming up, you used to have to go, if you're working with a client, part of that process was going through rotations and doing their jobs and actually seeing how the jobs are done and doing ride along while somebody's, delivering Frito-Lay product or stocking shelves. And it does give you a different perspective. And I think, unfortunately, that has been completely wiped away from that industry. But what about, how are you getting that instilled in your representatives today at Champion?
That's a really astute observation, Bryon, and it's a critical component of why we stay regionally focused. In the technological era, staffing has expanded to nationwide in most cases, if not international, and that's because you can hire folks remotely, you can do things and leverage technology where you don't have to be on site. However, there is no replacement for on-site communication, and in my opinion, the only way to experience a company culture is to feel it, and you cannot feel it if you're not on site. I can't describe Champion's culture in a way that you could carry that to someone else to describe it. You'd need to come here and feel how things feel in my offices and how people work together. So we meet on site with all of our hiring clients. We expect to go on a plant tour. We want to talk to the staff. We want to build a relationship with all the supervisors, because we're willing to give some of the real feedback about what every company fears might be going on within their culture. Because, Bryon, I'm sure you've heard the same thing I have a lot of times, that when a company doesn't know how to describe their culture, we work hard, we play hard, we all get together, we're a big happy family, and we both know that that isn't true across the board. Those feel good, but the truth is somewhere between all of those things.
Yeah, you've got excellence. Like, you got to just throw the word excellence out there, because that's the other thing. Well, we're built on excellence.
We're excellent.
Cool.
We promote from within. We work hard. We play hard. We all love each other.
So, okay, so you started out on the floor. You understood the business from the inside out, which, by the way, is an incredibly common story for very, very successful leaders. We see that a lot on the leaders list, where people say, I learned the industry first, and then I recognized how I could do it in a better way, or how I could keep improving it. So that makes sense. Then you got to a point where you were in a leadership role. I think you moved into COO. And how'd you end up in the top spot?
So the transition to COO is interesting in and of itself. After I became a branch manager and I was operating out of our mentor branch for a few years, as Champion approached the pandemic, I was highly disengaged and lost faith in our commitment to technology strategies. Like a lot of companies, as Champion approached the pandemic, we realized too late that it is important to have a technology strategy and a digital strategy. We were so much of the local, we do everything in person, we're an old school mentality company, was a driving value we had. Well, it became incredibly hindering as we approached the pandemic.
It also becomes an excuse and a crutch.
Correct.
Right.
Our owner was a baby boomer at the time who was technology adverse, who saw declining revenues and panicked. So in full disclosure, I stepped away from the company and went into semiconductor sales for 18 months until my phone rang, and our late CEO was on the phone and said, Kyle, we need to make some changes here. Champion is struggling. You were right about technology. I need someone to man the helm. So it was a surprise conversation. I was anticipating the birth of my first son at the time. And I made the choice to work with him to come back and deploy a new strategy that, protected those core values and how we operate as a company, but augmented the human experience with technology so we could continue at a higher volume, continue the same predictable talent models that we were creating, but support the need for a hybrid model at a minimum, if not a fully remote at times.
Got it. So you essentially transformed the business to a modern, the modern framework that you have today, and that's a tremendous lift. But then I'm assuming that and this is super important for our listeners to pay attention to, it wasn't the natural succession plan where the founder said, "Oh man, Kyle did such a great job. I'll just turn the company over to him, become the chairman. This is how we'll go through a common rotation." That didn't happen, did it?
No, sadly it did not. And we can certainly unpack the importance of a succession plan. And this is a story that's a perfect example of why that's a really important factor to start planning now, not later. Because I got less than 48 hours with our CEO prior to him being put into hospice care. So his medical needs were what prompted the call to rehire me as our COO. Our goal and our vision was to work side by side over a series of 3 to 5 years to transition the business to my control. Unfortunately, that plan was aborted 48 hours in. And I didn't see him from my second day of reemployment and didn't see him beyond his passing, sadly. So I quickly stepped into our founder and CEO's shoes and had to immediately start making decisions, quite frankly, without any background or experience in it. It was supposed to be a transitionary role for me.
Unbelievable. So that is, it redefines trial by fire. You are now. You did have the benefit of understanding the business prior to your boomerang. So at least you did have that going. You had a vision for what you could create and knew what you wanted to create. But now you got to work through the intricacies of how do I take over this company? And
Absolutely.
And clearly he had not put you in a position to be able to do that immediately. And so I just want to bring this up because it's, the buy-sell agreement, the basic things in business that oftentimes are overlooked because we're too busy in the business. And it's one of those simple things that should have been running in the background, preparing for, those kinds of situations. And God forbid anybody goes through that. But Kyle, congratulations on the yeoman's effort of rebuilding and doing that, and also working through that transition period. So I just think it was important, like your takeaways from that. What are the main things that should be on our leaders list after going through that experience? What are the things that you would say, tell everybody, make sure that this is top on your leaders list?
So it starts with creating a individual will, as well as beginning to look reflectively at what you've built at your company and starting to create a very clear document trail for everything. Every process should have its own set of documentation. Every vendor contract should be organized in a way that someone can look back and historically see the progression of vendor management. You should identify legacy employees for tribal knowledge and start creating pathways for that to be passed on, and training tools and devices. So as those individuals either fear this transition and make a change themselves or go along with the transition, that none of that is lost. Because while as leaders, we share many meetings where we talk about these great ideas and our employees hopefully know our values and deploy them in action on a day-to-day basis, there are a lot of nuts and bolts that go on behind the scenes that, as someone that firsthand had to do a lot of unpacking to learn this stuff, had to make a lot of really uncomfortable and awkward calls to say, my company has been paying you for a long time and I don't know what you do for us. Wow. In very vulnerable situations that expose a company to a lot of risk, and that's excluding some large areas like finance that I haven't touched, workers' compensation and safety for industrial facilities, lease agreements, and again, energy contracts, individual client-based agreements? How many of these were set up by a leader or manager that is no longer there, that was done on a verbal basis, where both you and the client company are going, this is what we've always done, but we don't have any precedents for this. The list goes on forever, and the costs only rise among these if they don't become compliance or legal issues in and of themselves.
Yeah, it's funny because oftentimes when a lot of these things get done, it's if an organization is built on this mindset and they do a great job of it and they just keep their house in order, that's fantastic. Most don't. When it typically happens is when someone starts thinking about going to buy another firm or selling their firm. So we talk about pre-due diligence a lot in this show. And what you just talked about is a relatively simple thing that oftentimes does not get done, but it's the assembling of the artifacts of proof. And so if everybody that's listening pay attention to the fact that not only does this help for succession, for transition, it also prepares you and puts you in a power position if you ever decide to buy another firm, because you can easily show them we have a house in order. And that literally changes the value of a company. Or if you are thinking about selling, then it's incredibly obvious because it'll be a requirement. But I just want to point out that kind of pre-due diligence, not only does it change the value of your company, but it avoids all of the nightmare that you went through. So since that's your top thing that you would share with people, I'll just put that in a different framework, because a lot of people think, well, I'm never going to die. I'm never going to have a problem. I'm never going to have something like that happen. And we all pray for that. But the reality is it typically does happen. Something happens like that. And you have to, so if you just frame it as pre-due diligence, it makes you feel a little bit better.
Absolutely. Small steps. I think the typical business owner hears a succession plan and thinks it is this complex series of working documents that a lawyer has to draft, that you're going to spend a lot of money. No, it is very small steps. Again, creating organizational systems. Start with the files on your computer. If you're someone that has thousands of loose documents saved in your My Documents folder, and you take the time to organize them, start creating.
You may be a problem if.
Correct. Think about who you trust to start involving in that plan. Send out employee engagement surveys to get employees' take on these things. Because the reality is, Bryon, as soon as you sit down with someone from a business valuation perspective, or a potential investor, these are the first things they're going to ask for. They're going to ask for financials. They're going to ask for a list of payables and who your vendor lists are and things like that. If that seems like I can't provide that right now, that is the simplest place to start, and you'll be amazed at how it spider webs and you work your way into a true succession plan.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. So that's usually we do this the other way around, where we talk about what's on your leader's list and then what should be on somebody else's. But that's gold and super important for people to be aware of. But let's talk about Champion today. What growth stage would you say you're in? You've been in the top spot for almost 5 years. Is that right?
So I've been leading the company for 5 years, and I had the opportunity to assume ownership of the company last July. So we'll be coming up on first year of ownership complete here this coming July.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. I would say Champion's in the maturation stage. Again, we have a strong presence here in Northeast Ohio. We've been in business 62 years, so we've continued to evolve, and that's what staffing incorporates. The industry changes incredibly rapidly, and that's, again, why we stay so focused geographically and industry-wise. But we're in that maturation phase where we know all of the area players. We know why they utilize or why they shouldn't utilize staffing, and we recognize that sometimes using a staffing company is a luxury too. So we want to help our supporting communities in building more viable talent populations, as well as making the cost to access our services lower and lower through augmenting technology and reducing our costs.
So that's interesting. You just talked about like literally changing the marketplace and in providing more talent and helping that talent grow. And that's one piece. And then the other side of it is how do you cut costs and how do you make yourself more efficient and, improve margins and EBITDA. So Kyle, what's on your leaders list right now?
So at the top of the list is emotional intelligence and emotional intelligence training. We've determined at Champion, and this is something we're doing internally as well as promoting externally with our clients, that there is a general lack of emotional training and development in the workforce, and that unfortunately one of the side effects through pandemics and a lean into technology is emotional intelligence has declined in the overall working population. And that's not just at the associate level, that rises all the way to the leader executive level as well. So recognizing that deficit led us to the Positive Intelligence Program, which is a really innovative program through the Stanford Neurology Department, led by a gentleman by Shirzad. And effectively, it's a mental fitness program with a partnering app that's designed to allow individuals to recognize what they call saboteurs or the negative voices within them, and to build a stronger emotional intelligence and positive mindset through developing how to navigate difficult situations, empathy. And what's interesting is most people that participate in this program find a larger benefit at home than at work, but that translates and carries through to work. When you're not burdened by how you're managing your family or how you're failing to manage your family, you think and operate clearly at work. And what's very powerful and what we've found at Champion is through everyone participating in this program, it becomes an operating system of sorts. This is now a common language here at Champion. We understand behavioral styles amongst managers, amongst our team members, and everyone else. So instead of just going, oh, Bryon must be having a bad day, let's leave him alone. No, we understand that Bryon is a hyper vigilant and dedicated person to results, and that's always going to be your priority. So no, you're not personally attacking me when you're talking about those things. You're ensuring that I'm meeting those expectations so I don't let the team down and you don't fail in your role as well. Think about the industrial environment. It is so team driven. The traditional assembly line is the easiest place. You have one weak link on an assembly line, it's not going to work. And if you have one weak link, fingers are going to get pointed every which way. So having an emotional intelligence base and investing in those kind of trainings is, to me, at the top of the leaders list. When you're telling me 2 out of 3 people aren't engaged at work, don't see their value or purpose in being there. And let's face it, overall, in a more challenging economy, there's a negative viewpoint towards most employers in their workspaces.
Man, I commend you on that. That doesn't sound Cleveland. That sounds more Palo Alto. That sounds more Silicon
It does.
Valley. But I'll tell you, we have found the exact same thing, right? I mean, when we talk about it in terms of employee engagement, work style, understanding the benefits that each individual brings. That's hard when you get to a company of, you got like 40 people, right? I mean, when you've got a larger organization, you're starting to expand past the ability to lay hands. It's difficult, but incredibly important to invest in this understanding so the rest of the organization can start to take that on from a cultural perspective. So
I'm really glad you bring that up, because that leads me to number 2 on my leaders list, actually, which is learn about your staff and what they need and how they think, and do so without fear of their answers. So number 2 on my leaders list is deep employee engagement surveys, and do them often. Look at not just compensation and benefits, perks, culture, viewpoint towards management and leadership, role clarification, KPIs and metrics. Ask all the ugly questions that you might not like the answer to, do so in a format that people have the privacy and discretion they deserve to sound off. And don't get defensive when you get the results. The biggest thing I see lacking in my hiring clients is a knowledge and understanding of what they really have to work with, what the biggest pain points are, and what their plan to address it is. And my experience is when you don't know, you build a mindset that is filled with absolute negatives. Nobody wants to work anymore. People don't care about their job. The supervisors are only caring because they make more than the associates. The leader doesn't understand or relate because they're coming from a different, economic status or financial background, or quite frankly, in a lot of cases, they're not even present. So start there and ask the questions that you need the answers to so you can build a viable roadmap to improving your culture. And again, if you truly have a family-based culture, why should you be so afraid to ask the participants in that culture? It's a family, right?
Yeah, it's funny. So there's there's a lot of argument against family mindset, right? Because
I
in
agree.
families you'll never let somebody go. You're always going to have that connection to family, and so I tend to think that a more applicable analogy would be a team and working in a team sport. But I get your point. Like it does kind of cross boundaries when you are in the region. You know each other. You go to church together. You see each other at the restaurants at night. It is different. And so I think that's great that you can acknowledge that and recognize it, because it just puts a different pressure on you. But that's why you're investing so heavily in
Right.
this
There comes a
mindset.
lot of responsibility with using the term family. And I think it's unfairly weaponized to blanket cultural problems and say, well, families have problems, we have our warts too, and to really kind of smother some of those concerns under that family moniker, as well as, to your point about it being, it's not the best approach or slightly inappropriate. It goads people into feeling they have a deeper responsibility beyond their job duties to the company.
Yep.
And I don't think that's a fair component.
Yeah, I get that too. So those are fantastic. I mean, that's definitely, when you talk about maturation as the growth stage, that aligns, your leaders list aligns perfectly with that, where we're investing in each other and we are starting to, it's not about like, do we understand the SOPs and do we understand our jobs? It's, do we understand the team and do we understand how we work together? And that
Absolutely.
makes
And that's what
perfect.
leads me to list number 3. Number 3 on our leaders list is, now that you've collected this information, you've charged the mindset of your team, it's time to develop a cultural or talent brand. So think of, we all think quickly that we have to brand and market our product, our services, and things like that. But the last brand we think we need to address, that is actually the one that feeds your talent pipeline, is how do we represent ourselves as an employer to this area?
Yeah.
And most companies talk about, we're a 110,000 square foot facility that was founded in 1979 by insert name here, which is great. It's part of the history. And I think history is important. But developing a cultural or talent brand that's driven by the associates, because everyone, when they're looking at job posts or deciding where they want to apply for a job, are thinking, what's in it for me? And quite frankly, Bryon, they're not going to believe what I have to say about it, but they are going to believe it from our associates and from our leadership, of answering the sometimes scary question, why does someone want to work here? Very simply, why does someone want to work here? And that's a very, very powerful answer when someone feels enabled, supported, there's a growth track, there's clarity, there's support and guidance. All of those things become very easy to answer, and they become very relatable to someone that's viewing that content. So I think, if I were to hit a top 3 leaders list, it's charge the brains of your staff, understand how they think, act, and operate and view your company. And if you don't like those responses, make some changes so that way you can be proud and ask them to build a cultural brand, whether that's using video, audio, blogs, and empowering them. And watch as your talent pipeline blossoms. You come from a reactive staffing position to an active talent pipeline. And quite frankly, you can eliminate the need for staffing companies. And I applaud companies that do that. I'm happy to work myself out of a job because that means you're a phenomenal employer in this area and we can help you at a later growth stage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome, Kyle. So for our listeners, the tactics, like there are simple tactics. If you're listening to this and then you're saying, God, Kyle is really smart, and I can see how he's doing this. I want to do this too. What you basically said is, for EQ, let's identify a work style tool of some kind, right? So that we can start
Right.
to understand the personalities and our strengths and how we can best benefit from that. 2, understand your employees and what motivates them, and so that's really a research perspective. So put in feedback loops, whether that's 360s at the annually, or whether that's after every project, doing some sort of a review after each one. There's a ton of different ways, but you build that into the natural process of constantly listening and learning. And then that third piece of building that cultural brand, I always, brand tends to make some people feel a little too squishy. So I always say, develop a clear expectations framework, document
I
it,
like that.
make that available to people so that they can then understand those expectations. And then it takes on a life of its own. That's when you do
Right.
start to brand it, because you have pride behind it. So I just want to share that. Those are some specific tactics that everybody can take away from this as soon as they're done listening and put into action.
And that's what I really wanted to focus on, Bryon, especially in our market. We work with a lot of, sub 20 employee companies that they leap to say, I can't be like Google and offer free dry cleaning and, teach you foreign languages and pay for advanced certifications. But they don't realize that there's local and state subsidization for formalized training, and that there's all sorts of perks that they can offer beyond hastily throwing a couple pizzas in the break room and saying that's employee appreciation.
So good, Kyle. So good, man. This was really helpful. I just want to take a moment to thank you for being on the leaders list, for sharing everything that you've been through in your journey. And I can't wait to have you back on when we can talk about, your future successes.
I really appreciate it. It was an absolute pleasure joining you here today. I invite any of the listeners to reach out on LinkedIn if you want to discuss ideas, if you're stuck, if you're fearful, or you're thinking it might start to be too late for you. Again, while Champion is regionally focused, I'm here to help everyone grow. I believe in that networking through giving first. So if I can offer any advice or guidance, please reach out. I'd be happy to have the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks again.